So there I am, standing at the edge of my field, watching Karen's $20,000 wedding tent flap in the wind like some kind of royal pavilion. Music blasting, guests in high heels crushing my soybean sprouts, and her caterer has the nerve to ask if I can move my tractor because it's ruining the look. That's when I calmly flipped the switch, and the manure spreaders roared to life. Cue the intro screen. How did this all happen? Let's rewind 4 days. I was just doing my usual thing, working the land my grandfather busted his back to keep in the family. My field borders the fancy Fairway Hills development, which popped up about 6 years ago when some architects decided farmland would look better behind million-dollar windows. They brought in Tesla chargers, dog spas, and a shiny new HOA that thinks rural charm means putting flannel on your golden retriever. I didn't mind them at first. I figured they'd stay on their side of the fence, and I'd stay on mine. That was before Karen moved in. Karen, the HOA queen and self-proclaimed protector of neighborhood peace, moved in 2 years ago like a blonde tornado with a clipboard. First, it was noise complaints. Could you not start your tractor before 9 a.m.? My husband meditates. Then it was landscaping tips. Wouldn't a nice vinyl privacy fence be better than those old cedar posts? And finally, the crowning achievement. A letter politely asking me to reconsider the smell of my manure piles, because apparently, the scent of actual farming was too much for the delicate suburban noses of Fairway Hills. Now, I'm not the type to throw a fit. I'm a calm guy, raised to believe in solving problems with patience and a well-set boundary. I declined her suggestions, every single one, with the kind of smile that says, "Bless your heart, but no." I thought that would be the end of it. Karen, unfortunately, is the type of woman who takes a polite no as an invitation to turn things up a notch. The week before all this manure madness kicked off, I got a newsletter from the HOA. Yes, they send me one, even though I'm not part of it. Apparently, it's their way of building community. I usually toss it, but this time, something caught my eye. Exciting news, it shouted. The Henderson wedding is going to be hosted right here in Fairway Hills, with a breathtaking view of our neighboring open land. There was even a mock-up picture. It took me a second, but then I saw it. That open land they were so excited about. It was my southern field. I blinked. Maybe it was a mistake. Surely they didn't mean they were actually going to use my field, right? They probably just meant the view. I decided not to jump to conclusions. Then came Thursday. I pulled into my driveway after a long morning at the feed store, and sure enough, there it was. A huge white event tent, as tall as a barn and twice as wide, sitting right in the middle of my soybean field like it belonged there. Workers ran around, hammering stakes into the ground, laying out plastic flooring, and hanging string lights like they were putting together a Pinterest board. And Karen, of course, stood in the center of it all, bossing them around like she was some kind of bargain bin wedding planner with a superiority complex. I parked the truck and got out, doing my best not to let my jaw drop. "What is this?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear the madness out loud. Karen turned, smiling like she was doing me a huge favor. "Oh, hi. Isn't it beautiful? Don't worry, it's just for one day." I looked past her at the tire tracks running over my crops. "You're on my property." She waved her hand dismissively, like I was stating the obvious. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just the back edge, and it's not like you were using it for anything this weekend." I stared at her for a moment. "This is private farmland. Did you ask for permission? Did you even check the deed lines?" "Oh, we got it cleared with the HOA," she said, as if those letters meant anything to someone who didn't even live under their jurisdiction. "Karen," I said, trying to stay calm, "you and the HOA have as much authority over this field as my dog does over the moon. You're trespassing." That's when the smile disappeared. Her arms crossed. "Well, if you want to be difficult, we can talk about this with a lawyer." I nodded slowly and took a deep breath. "You go ahead. But I'm telling you right now, if that tent is still here this weekend, I'll be working this field. Business as usual." "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "I absolutely would." She turned her back on me, muttering something about entitled hicks and ungrateful neighbors, then marched off to bark orders at the poor caterers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I stood there for a minute, staring at my own field like it wasn't even mine anymore. The worst part wasn't the trespassing. It wasn't even the damage to the crops. It was the assumption that I wouldn't stand up for myself, that I was just some passive country bumpkin too afraid of a lawsuit to fight back. Karen didn't just destroy my soybeans. She crushed my pride. That night, I poured myself a drink, sat at the kitchen table, and pulled out every land document I had. I highlighted the boundary lines, made copies, and even printed satellite images with overlays. The next morning, I called up an old college friend who's now a sheriff's deputy and had him walk the field with me, just to make sure everything was on the record. I sent Karen and the HOA a formal trespassing notice, along with an invoice for crop damage. No reply. Of course not. People like her think paperwork is optional, until the court stamp shows up. On Friday, the tent was still standing. They'd added more decorations. They even hung chandeliers inside, as if dangling fancy glass would make the soybeans look like Versailles. My tractor was parked in the barn, freshly oiled. The manure tanks were filled, and my patience? Gone. I spent the rest of the day getting ready. Sharpened the mower blades, topped off the spreaders, double-checked the hydraulic lines. I even cleaned the cab windows. Figured if I was going to make a statement, I might as well be able to see it clearly. That evening, just as the sun began to set, I saw Karen in the distance, walking her daughter through what looked like a practice run. They were both laughing, probably imagining how perfect everything would be once the guests showed up. Karen didn't even glance my way. Not a single sign of nervousness. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to farm this weekend. I was going to make sure no one in Fairway Hills would ever forget where my land ended and theirs began. As I was heading inside for some rest, a white SUV pulled up next to the tent. A man in a cheap suit got out, holding a clipboard, looking around like he was surveying the place. I didn't recognize him, but I had a gut feeling this wasn't just about a wedding anymore. The man in the cheap suit turned out to be a wedding planner, or at least that's what he claimed. I watched from my porch as he walked the field with Karen, both of them pointing at the tent like they were discussing some major architectural project. He pulled out a measuring tape, pretending to know what he was doing, while Karen pointed toward my barn. My barn. That was the first red flag. The second came when another SUV pulled up, followed by a catering van. By the time I'd finished my coffee, people were unloading tables and chairs right in front of my tractor shed. I walked over, as calm as I could. One of the caterers, a young guy who clearly had no idea what he was getting into, greeted me with a cheerful "good morning" as he hauled a tray of folding chairs. I nodded and asked him where exactly they planned on setting those up. He pointed to a patch of grass just a few feet from my irrigation trench. "Right here, sir. The bride wants a more rustic cocktail area." That's when I saw Karen rounding the corner, already furious. "What are you doing?" she snapped, as if I were the one breaking the rules. "What do you mean, what am I doing?" I asked. "Just checking how many ways you're messing with my property today." "Oh, come on," she said, eyeing the caterers behind her. "It's not like we're building a house. It's one event. One day. Quit being so dramatic. You're turning my field into a full-scale wedding setup and using my barn as a prep kitchen. That's not just one day. That's grounds for a lawsuit." Her grin disappeared. "Look," she hissed, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You're not going to win. Everyone's already coming tomorrow. If you cause a scene, you'll look like the bitter neighbor no one wants to deal with." "That would be the case," I said, "if this were a neighborhood issue. But it's not. It's trespassing, property damage, and using agricultural land without permission. Stop being ridiculous. This is exactly why we tried to get you into the HOA. And this," I said, stepping closer, "is exactly why I never joined." I turned away before she could spew more venom. I had more important things to do, like getting ready. The next few hours were spent gathering every piece of evidence I had. I printed copies of the deed. I marked the property lines with flags, markers, and some polite signs that read, "Private farmland. Do not enter." Then I made sure my manure spreaders were in top shape. Karen wanted rustic. She was going to get rustic. Around noon, I called my cousin Mark. He's a lawyer who owes me more favors than I can count, and thankfully, he loves a good revenge story. I gave him the rundown, and before I even finished the second sentence, he was already laughing. "Got photos?" he asked. "Dozens. Video. Security cameras on the barn. Got everything." "I'll be there tomorrow," he said. "Bring beer." The rest of the day felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. More vendors kept showing up. Florists, decorators, photographers, and even a DJ who had the audacity to ask if I could move my combine out of the shot because it messed with the vibe. I told him it was the only thing real in this whole setup. He didn't laugh. As the evening set in, I stood at the edge of the field and watched the string lights flicker to life under the huge tent. People were laughing, drinking, and practicing toasts. Karen's daughter, the bride, walked through the setup in a white sundress, doing that thing brides do where they act like they're gliding instead of walking. She looked genuinely happy. For a brief moment, just a flash, I wondered if I might be going too far. But then I thought about the ruined soybean sprouts, the barn-turned kitchen, the legal threats, and the way Karen spoke to me like I was beneath her designer heels. I remembered the nerve it took for her to think I would just sit back and let her take over my land for her little princess fantasy. And that thought faded. I spent the night in my shed, not because I had to, but because I didn't trust them. Sure enough, around midnight, I saw flashlights. 2 teenagers, probably relatives of the bride, sneaking around, giggling, and trying to find a spot to light fireworks. I stepped out and turned on the barn's floodlights. They froze like raccoons caught in a trash can. "You've got 10 seconds to get out of here before I call the sheriff," I said. They bolted. I didn't even need to count. The next morning was hot and humid, the perfect weather for what I had planned. Karen's crew was already busy by 7, setting up pastries and shining glassware. Mark showed up right on time, coffee in one hand, GoPro in the other. "You ready to make some memories?" he asked, grinning. "Oh, I'm ready." We set up the cameras, double-checked that everything was recording from multiple angles, and waited. Noon was when everything came to a head. That's when the guests started arriving. BMWs, Range Rovers, and at least one limo pulled into the side road that ran along my property. People stepped out in pastel suits and cocktail dresses, unaware they were about to witness the most unforgettable wedding of their lives. Karen came over to me again, this time in full mother-of-the-bride attire. "I assume you're not going to cause any trouble today," she said, her voice sweet but tight, like poisoned honey. I gave her my best farmer's smile. "Karen, I'm just working my field." As promised. And with that, I walked back to my tractor, climbed into the cab, and waited for the signal. That signal came when the music started. A string quartet, of course. The bride began her walk down the white carpet, sunlight bouncing off her rhinestone-studded gown. Everyone stood, everyone smiled, and I flipped the switch. The manure spreaders groaned to life with a sound that could only be called agricultural vengeance. The fans roared, the sprayers spun, and a fine, unmistakable mist of liquefied fertilizer began to spread through the air like judgment from above. Screams. Real, honest-to-God screams. Guests scattered, dresses hitched up to their knees. People rushed toward their fancy cars, holding their noses. Karen was standing there, frozen, mouth hanging open, unable to grasp the chaos she had caused. As for the bride, she looked like she belonged in a horror film, mascara running down her face, bouquet thrown like a weapon, screaming at anyone who would listen. Mark stood by the barn, sipping his coffee like he was watching the final scene of a summer blockbuster. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse for them, a sheriff's car pulled into the driveway. This time, it wasn't for me. The sheriff got out of his car, looking as confused as anyone could without tipping over. Deputy Halverson, a good guy I've known since high school, adjusted his hat and took in the scene. To his left, absolute chaos. Guests covered in what could only be described as liquefied cow manure, high heels stuck in the soft dirt, folding chairs knocked over like some war zone aftermath. To his right, there was me, standing next to my tractor, waving as if I was just mowing the lawn. He didn't ask questions right away. He just stood there for a moment, taking it all in, breathing through his mouth. Karen saw him and practically ran toward him, dragging her dress through the mud in her hurry. Her makeup was a mess, her face a mix of outrage and sheer defeat. I could hear her shouting before she even got close, ranting about biohazards, chemical warfare, and how this monster was ruining her daughter's future. Halverson gave me a quick look as she went off, and I just raised an eyebrow. He'd been through enough neighbor spats to know there were always two sides, but even he was struggling not to laugh. When she finally stopped for air, he raised his hand like a crossing guard. "Ma'am," he said in the calmest tone he could manage, "I need you to step back and take a deep breath before you pass out." Karen looked like she might blow up. "Are you going to arrest him?" she yelled, pointing at me like I was some criminal. "I'll talk to him," Halverson said, and she stormed off, muttering, "This isn't over." He walked over to my tractor as I powered it down and climbed out. Mark joined us, holding a clipboard and his coffee, as calm as a breeze on a summer day. Halverson squinted at the manure spreader, still dripping onto the ground, then looked back at me. "So, you want to explain?" he asked. I shrugged. I was working my field. I warned them. I filed a trespassing notice. Got pictures, GPS coordinates, video of them setting up. Want to see the legal packet? Mark offered it like he was handing me a sandwich. Everything's in here. Dated, signed, and filed. Halverson took the folder and flipped through it, nodding slowly. They didn't have permission? None, I said. They didn't ask for permission until it was already in place. I've got the drone footage of the whole thing. He gave me another nod. So they set up on your land without asking? Yep. Damaged the crops. Used the barn. They parked in the irrigation access lane. Tried to block my combine too. Halverson sighed and rubbed his nose. Okay, so we've got a solid case for trespassing and property damage. Do you have an estimate of your losses? I'm working on it, I replied. But it's going to be over 10 grand. Behind us, the bride was screaming about her dress and how this day was supposed to be perfect. The DJ was hauling his gear back to the van, trying not to gag, and the caterers were practically running away, their white uniforms now marked with a fresh layer of farm-fresh regret. Halverson glanced at the chaos, then back at me. You know, you've made my week, right? Just doing my part for rural justice, I said, keeping a straight face. Karen came charging over, dragging some poor guy in a bow tie who looked like he already regretted his morning. This is my lawyer, she said. The man opened his mouth to speak, but Karen beat him to it. We're going to sue this man for everything he's got. He attacked a wedding. This is emotional warfare. Halverson raised his hand to cut her off. Ma'am, I'm going to stop you right there. From what I can see, you and your guests trespassed on private property after being clearly warned not to. If you want to press charges, go ahead. But be ready for a countersuit that's a whole lot stronger. The lawyer in the bow tie blinked, slowly turning to Karen. You didn't get written permission? He asked, his voice tight. She waved him off. Oh, come on. It's just a field. Yeah, tell that to the soybeans. Mark couldn't help but laugh. Karen looked around at us, probably realizing for the first time that she wasn't going to get her way. Her perfect day, her Pinterest fantasy for her daughter's wedding, it was all covered in manure and legal consequences. She opened her mouth again, but no words came out. Just a strangled noise before she stormed off, mud flying from her designer heels like a child throwing a tantrum in a puddle. The guests kept leaving, most of them giving me dirty looks as if I'd personally wronged them. One guy stopped to tell me I'd be hearing from his firm, which, it would have been pretty scary if he hadn't been covered in cow manure and slipping around in the mud while saying it. One of the bridesmaids even tried to wash herself off using one of my irrigation spigots, only to scream when she realized it was connected directly to the manure system. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. By the time the last car left, the tent was half collapsed and leaning sideways, like it had been through a storm. The field looked like a war zone, but it was my war zone again. Karen was nowhere to be seen, probably off somewhere blaming everyone else but herself. Mark and I walked around the property, documenting everything. We snapped photos, took measurements, and got a few wide shots of the tent wreckage for good measure. He had this little twinkle in his eye the entire time. You know, he said, this is going to make one hell of a case study for my law students. Glad I could help, I replied, flipping the switch to drain the spreaders. We sat on the tailgate of my truck for a while, drinking cold beers and watching the sun set over what used to be a wedding venue and was now just a wet, stinking mess of bad decisions. For the first time in days, I could feel the tension leaving my shoulders. Not because I had won, that was still to come, but because I'd taken back control. I'd reminded someone like Karen that just throwing money at something doesn't mean you get to own it. The next day, I got a call from Halverson. He'd officially closed the case and filed the trespassing report with the county. According to him, Karen had already started hiring a PR firm to try to fix the story, whatever that meant. I also got a formal letter from the HOA's lawyer, asking if we could resolve the issue without making it public. Too late for that. The footage was already with Mark's editor friend, who was more than happy to put together a montage for social media. Title: HOA Karen vs. The Farmer, a love story gone wrong. But the real icing on the cake came later that afternoon when I got a thick envelope in the mail. Inside was a formal notice from the bride and groom, threatening to sue me for emotional distress, ruined memories, and loss of influencer sponsorship. I stared at the letter for a full minute, then just burst out laughing. These people still didn't get it. This wasn't just a petty fight. This was a lesson. And the best part? The manure hadn't even settled yet. I thought the storm would calm down after all that. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's that they don't give up easily. They retreat, regroup, and then come back with phase 2 of their disaster like it's part of some grand strategy. 3 days after the incident, when the tent was finally hauled away in pieces and most of the wet debris had been cleaned out of my field by hired hands in hazmat suits, I got another round of visits. This time, it was 2 new members from the HOA board, faces I didn't recognize, both in matching polos with the uneasy vibe of people on a forced apology mission. They stood stiffly at my gate, one holding a manila folder, the other nervously messing with his clipboard. I let them stew for a moment before strolling over, wiping my hands on a rag from the tractor engine I'd been working on. "Morning," said the taller one. "We're here representing the Fairway Hills HOA. "Oh, great," I replied. I was wondering when the cleanup crew would show up. They exchanged looks, and the shorter one cleared his throat. We wanted to formally apologize for what happened on your property. The board never approved Mrs. Taylor using your land, and we deeply regret the misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Unfortunate oversight," the taller one quickly added, as if rephrasing it would somehow make it sound better. I let them struggle for a moment before holding out my hand. "Do you have this in writing?" The manila folder was handed over immediately, like a peace offering. Inside, there was an apology letter, signed by all the board members except Karen. There was also a second letter, asking if I'd consider refraining from posting or sharing the wedding video. In exchange, they were offering a settlement, partial compensation for the crop damage, an official acknowledgement of my non-HOA status, and a promise to never involve me in neighborhood issues again. I didn't respond immediately, just nodded, closed the folder, and walked back to the porch. When they followed, I turned and smiled. "I appreciate the apology," I said. "Really, I do. And I'll think about the offer." As for the video, I let the silence drag on for a beat. That's already gone viral. Both men turned pale. My cousin's friend posted it on 3 platforms. Last I checked, it's over 2 million views. A local news station even reached out for an interview. People love stories where someone finally takes a stand against entitled bullies, especially when manure's involved. They left shortly after, visibly defeated and uncomfortable. I don't think either of them expected to make internet history that week. The HOA drama didn't end there. Karen, furious that her personal embarrassment had become a community issue, started fighting back. She sent a long email to all the Fairway Hills residents, accusing me of malicious sabotage and calling the event an unprovoked act of aggression. Several neighbors forwarded the email to me, along with their own apologies. Turns out, most of them weren't too fond of Karen either. Her reign of passive-aggressive terror had gotten old over the years, and my little incident, what they now called it, was the breaking point. Within a week, a petition started going around to remove her as HOA president. By the end of the month, she was out, replaced by Janice, a retired librarian, who came over the next day with a pie and a handwritten card. Janice said, and I quote, "You were the hero none of us knew we needed." It was an apple pie. Really good, too. Karen's downfall didn't stop with the HOA. Word got around that her daughter's wedding sponsors dropped out after the viral video. Apparently, the family had been relying on that wedding to help boost the daughter's social media profile. Something to do with an influencer deal for organic beauty products and honeymoon travel blogs. Hard to market lavender eye cream when a video of your manure-covered meltdown is all over fail compilations. I never heard from the daughter, but I did get one more letter from Karen's lawyer, this time less threatening, more pleading. It asked if I'd consider private arbitration and confidential conflict resolution. I ignored it. They had their shot. Instead, I used part of my settlement money to build a new fence, not because I needed it, but because I wanted a clear, undeniable line between my property and theirs. Along the field, right where the tent had been, I put up a long wooden fence. On the inside, facing my land, I hung laminated stills from the video. The moment the manure hit the tent, the guests running in panic, Karen's face frozen in shock. A little gallery of poetic justice. For me, I also replaced my old tractor. Got a newer model. More horsepower. Better spreader attachments. I named it Karen. Had the name painted on the side in gold just to make sure the message stuck. Life, once again, found its rhythm. The crops bounced back, the land healed, and the barn got a good cleaning. I never heard another complaint from Fairway Hills. If anything, they were overly polite. I'd find cookies at my mailbox, handwritten notes thanking me for standing up for property rights. One guy even offered to help with fencing as a neighborly gesture. I turned him down, but it was a nice offer. Mark, of course, wouldn't drop it. Every time he came over, he'd ask if we were ready to write the book or start a podcast. You could call it spreading the truth, he'd say, grinning like an idiot. I told him to stick to his day job, but I couldn't deny it. The whole thing had turned into a bit of a neighborhood tale. I guess that's the thing with boundaries. People either honor them, or they act like they don't exist until they get called out. Karen thought she could treat my property like some kind of accessory, just a backdrop to her perfectly crafted life. But out here, land means more than that. It's not just real estate, it's a piece of history. It's about hard work. It's about family. You don't mess with that and think you'll get away unscathed. In the end, I didn't need to shout, argue, or create a scene. All I had to do was what I always do. Keep my word, stand firm, and pull out the heavy machinery when necessary. The best part? No more HOA letters in my mailbox. No more surprise checks. No more drones overhead. Just the peaceful sound of silence, the rich smell of earth and diesel, and the realization that sometimes the world still makes room for justice, messy as it might be. As for Karen, last I heard, she's selling her house. The asking price has dropped twice already. Word is, she's leaving the state, headed somewhere quieter, somewhere without farms. That might be for the best, because this land, it doesn't forget.